Hello. This video I thought I would address the topic of this question of 432 Hertz as opposed to 440 Hertz. Something that is often mentioned on many videos, that for some unknown reason that music is broadcast at 440 these days, where it used to be 432, and it highlights a pattern. It's the same pattern that you'll find with the whole question of the Titanic, such things as Tutankhamun, and it always comes down to the devil is in the detail. Before we go into that, just as a reminder, and the time is always now. If you're struggling, sometimes it's good to have an outside perspective, because consider it like you're the goldfish in the goldfish bowl, but you're trying to see from outside the goldfish bowl and maybe not aware that you're actually in water, and what is outside the goldfish bowl is water in another form, as air, separated by, you could say, a dome or a glass, i.e. the fish bowl. It's referenced in a Pink Floyd song about being like two lost souls in a fish bowl, something along those lines. I can't remember the actual lyrics of that song. While we're on the subject of songs, there's a huge distinction between music and songs. So to illustrate the point, there is art in the form of compositions which are written and created from the imagination by composers. And you have great composers, and if you look at their output, you'll find, say, for example, Franz Schubert and Ludwig van Beethoven. They wrote songs as well as writing music. So there's symphonies, concertos, chamber music, piano pieces, and then there are songs. They have created settings of poems and things to music. Then you have songs, the modern day culture, what is called popular music for the masses. Now, a songwriter cannot compose. A songwriter cannot write a symphony or a concerto. Music is just one of many arts that actually reflects and is the true sort of journalist of life itself. That is why there are no Beethovens and no Mozarts today. That is why harmony and melody is replaced by a repetitive drum beat. There is a reason for that, like there is a reason for everything. But a bit of etymology here. If we break down the word reason, hopefully you can hear it's a re-sun. So all these things are actually little clues for us to discover. When something happens, there is a re-sun. It is trying to find the light inside. As much as this creative power that has no physical form is an artist, it is also a gardener. So if you consider, if you're watering with a watering can, the rose will put out water. Now, if you hold that watering can steady and pour it, the majority of the water will go on directly below it, and then some of the water will go out at an angle and will provide a certain amount of water to that surrounds it. So effectively, the Creator, or God, whatever you want to call it, is a gardener. Because it is a spiritual ejaculation, like the water from the watering can, and it will fall onto a garden. It's a spiritual water that is falling onto a garden. Excuse me. And what you'll find is that gets the most water will grow. That which doesn't get quite so much water, or none at all, or where the seeds are planted in stony ground, will not grow, or will grow distorted. So to put this into context, it's something Rudolf Steiner talks about, in that you don't get generational geniuses. If you look at Beethoven, he's a standalone figure in his family. His father was a musician and a performer, but not a particularly good one. I think his name was Johann van Beethoven, and he succumbed to alcoholism and was quite abusive to poor Ludwig as a child. But he idolized his grandfather, who was also called Ludwig van Beethoven, for which he was named after, who was a musician and became like an idealized inspiration to Ludwig van Beethoven the Younger, the famous one that we know today. You can look at other composers. Yes, you have Leopold Mozart, who is very much overshadowed by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Incidentally, is it any coincidence that Mozart lived to the age of 35? And part of his full name, I can't remember all of it, but it's Wolfgang Amadeus, and there's a couple of other names, one of which is Xavier. Does that not sound like Saviour to you? Or is that just coincidence? Then, of course, you have Joseph and Michael Haydn, two brothers, and then you have J.S. Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, and his four sons, who are also composers in their own right. But generally speaking, you'll find that these geniuses, these great composers, and it's not just in music, you look across at any other spectrum of what is regarded as a genius. They are like those seeds that have received the most water. It is spirit, effectively, at work. But in this reality, it is very much it's very much encapsulated by that saying, the devil is in the detail, and so easy to miss what is actually a very simple message. So a prime example of this is Tutankhamun. Was he real? Did he exist? Is all of it fake? The real message in that story is you cannot take it with you. Hence all the material wealth of Tutankhamun has been found, but Tutankhamun is no more. You'll also see this reflected in the story of the Titanic and all the conspiracy theories of, was it the Olympic, was it the Titanic, when the message is actually very simple. Just look at the story. What is it really showing you? Basically, the story goes that there were three billionaires who were stopping the formation of the Federal Reserve in 1913. So the real message of the story is saying what we would conceive as the control system. They are letting you know the depths they will sink to. So if it requires drowning, I don't know what the figures were, 1,700 people to get rid of 3. That is the depth they will sink to. But look how easy it is if you start investigating this. Look at videos on, was it the Titanic? It comes down to basically rivet counting. Did it have 3 funnels? Did it have 4 funnels? And it is missing the simple message that is there. This pattern is very much the same with this debate over 432 versus 440 Hertz. Like everything else, we need to go back to source. I'm just sort of looking at the notes I've made for this because I've got more than one video that is sort of going round. See that the world does spin. Things are going round and round. Earth is an anagram of heart. It's talking about the internal self here. So we need to look at the ingredients. You always need to go back to source. So the primary ingredient is not the 432 or the 440 question, the frequency. And there's always the diagrams of when something is at 440 Hertz, it's not perfect, it's got distortion, things don't quite line up. But we're in a realm of duality. It shows contrast by being in 440. If it's in 432, it's in perfect harmony. It would be like being in this world and everything going right, and never having the experience and being able to see the contrast, to know what feels comfortable, what feels as a discomfort to you. It is a very necessary part of this experience in this realm that has a perception of duality, because it shows contrasts. So if we go back to the source, it is not the question over the Hertz. The source is the music. Where does the music come from? Well, it's an idea, it's an inspiration that's created in the imagination of the composer of that music. If we take the word idea, it consists of 2 key parts. The ID, which is the individual, i.e. the composer, the artist that creates, and then the EA. We're in a photo-negative reality. That is reflected in, why is the heart chakra depicted in green and not red, when the heart is always depicted as red? But if you compare a photograph to its counterpart as a negative on a film strip, and you hold it up to the light, what you'll see is the light becomes the shadow, green becomes red, and red becomes green. It's reflection, it's showing opposites. So the EA of the idea, that spark of inspiration that gets an ID, is a reverse of the A and the E, the ampersand, the fused A and E together, the all and the everything, which now becomes the everything and the all. That is the idea. So the composer, the artist, is effectively the medium of the art spirit working through an individual. It can equally apply to a reading of tarot cards, where the art spirit, because there's always art in the illustrations on the cards, the medium that is the artist that created those illustrations on those cards, has put heart and soul into that creation, is an extension of creation into this physical reality, and it encapsulates and locks in an energy, which is a type of frequency which some are more gifted and are able to read from what is shown in those cards. That's not all of it, but it's just a sort of brief overview to use as an example here. So when the EA manifests with an ID, it forms a union, so the artist is the medium of the art spirit, of that creative power. As Neville Goddard would say, God is all imagination. It's creativity, so art by definition is God in action. It is creativity. So therefore, the higher power, the source, is not the frequency that is being broadcast, but the music, the creation of that art. It's the higher power. So without that art, without that music, what effect does that frequency have? It can't do anything without there being something to become an overlay upon. The frequency in Hertz is part of this reality. But the positive aspect is that it shows a distortion so we can distinguish. But you can test this for yourself, because you can take any piece of music. You can get computer programs if there isn't something already readily available on YouTube that will give you that same piece of music in 432 Hertz. You can actually convert a piece of music from 440 into 432 or any other frequency. Then you can test it for yourself. Which does feel better to you? Do you even notice a difference in it? I would suggest that what will override that is what you feel from that music, from the source, not from the frequency. That is the golden rule, to always go back to source and look at the simple message that is being relayed, in this case through sound. So even if you're listening to a piece of music, which invariably you will have done, something that you really like, something that maybe has inspired you, has uplifted you, did that 440 Hertz, whether you knew about it or not, actually have a negative effect? Or did that power of that creativity of the art spirit still not convey something to you, regardless of what frequency it is coming through to you? I'm just sort of having a quick read of my notes here. But let's look at the numerology of this. So 440. Let's consider the numbers here. The frequency, although unseen, is part of the external, and it provides a clue when it is internalized. It is said that the Earth has a tilt, an imbalance, and it can be found through the perspective of the relationship between the external and the internal. Ask yourself this question: do you feel inclined by 23 degrees? If the Earth has a tilt and we're on the Earth, do you feel like you're leaning one way or the other? So if you're sitting or standing up, do you feel that you're upright, or do you feel that you're at an angle? Do you have a point of reference here? But if you are standing up and leaning against a wall, internally your third ear will let you know that you're at an angle. And remember, Earth is an anagram of heart. A number that I see often, and I'm sure many of you out there also see this number quite frequently, is 144. Well, the 1 refers to the individual, which leaves the 4-4, which is expressed in this 440 Hertz. There is an imbalance to the Earth because one of the four has been moved across to the other side, so you end up with either 53 or 35. When something is repeated over and over, it follows that pattern of it's through repetition that something becomes second nature. We are repeatedly told that we have 5 senses. This is not true for the external. You actually have 4 senses, because you cannot count taste as a standalone sense, as an external sense, because you cannot taste anything without first touching it, whether it's a piece of food you pick up with your hand, so therefore you've touched it, and then you put it in your mouth. But there's touch again, because the tongue has to touch that food for you to experience taste. So taste is not a sense, a standalone sense like the other 4. So in effect, we only have 4 senses. So there's your first 4. We are told that we are in 3 dimensions. Again, this is not true. What is this fourth dimension? Well, it comes back to the whole idea about the garden. Take a seed, plant it in soil, water it. Within a few days, you should hopefully see a green shoot. There's your 4th dimension. It is time, but it is operating on a different time scale than the imposed one, the man-made one, of clock time. So if you can recognize in the external, there are 4 dimensions and 4 senses, that is what the 4 is all about in this context. To which you add the O, the organic, because when it is broadcast, it is not going to the 1, as in 144, it is going to the many. Hence it is 440. And it is 40 in some regards, because we are in a realm of duality. But it's not a negative fault. It is a positive fault when you recognize what is really being shown by this. So this whole thing with this 432 versus 440 debates, it's another thing like you can take a photograph, and it said a photograph does not lie, but the caption that goes with it can totally alter what is then seen in that photograph. So is the 440 Hertz such a bad thing after all? Is it really relevant, or is it just more the devil's in the detail? Now it's over to you to decide for yourself. Weigh things up inside yourself. Is it really causing an imbalance in you? Did the music not inspire and uplift you, something that you hold in high regard? Whether you knew about it being broadcast at 440 or not. Even if you were to know that, does it change how you feel about that piece of music? Time is another thing, just as a sort of ending footnote here, that is given a sort of a bad rap as something negative. But time is just a measurement that doesn't really exist. But consider any situation that you find yourself in. Ask yourself, if that same situation had happened, say, 6 months, a year ago, or 5 years ago, what would your reaction be then compared to now? Or your response, what would that have been compared to now? Because with that measurement, being able to look back to a year ago or whatever, you may find that you would have reacted rather than responded. You may well have been triggered, but with that benefit of more experiences, you are now facing that situation in a very different way. So again, this whole thing about time, if we look at it far more simply and not just see the negative to something, but to see the positive. And if we look at the numbers, 4 and 3 and 2 makes 9, which implies completion. But the 440, the 2 4s, because you don't count a 0 in numerology, it shows balance. It's a symbol of eternity when you combine the two together. It gives you that number 8. And certainly in this reality, certain compositions by the great composers, by Mozart and Haydn and Beethoven, to just name 3, have stood the test of time and are still held in high regard today. They are part of this realm, and in a way, there is a form of immortality, because just like the artist that has created an illustration for a tarot card, the composer has created something with music, but it comes back to life with the participation of musicians. It requires living beings to bring it back to life. But with those 3 composers, as I've mentioned, they have stood the test of time. So there is a form of immortality in which is often said, oh, Mozart lives on, Beethoven lives on, and so on. And they certainly do in their music, in what they have created. So there's a few things to think about here, but mostly what I want you to consider with any of these things is to not get lost in the detail, because it is so easy to get sucked in, to pick a side on these things and advocate 432 or say, oh, that's a load of crap, which is more true, really. Surely it is always go back to source, which is the art itself that has manifested from the art spirit through an artist, which is the medium of that art spirit, which is then conveyed. So we become the recipients of it. And maybe it does become like that water from the watering can that is getting the most water, that it inspires and uplifts. And in turn, we are inspired to create something. For this, I will cite Arnold Böcklin's painting The Isle of the Dead, which exists in 6 versions, if you include the completion by his son, which were painted between 1880 and 1886 for the first 5, and then the completion of the 6th was in 1901. In turn, that painting inspired Sergei Rachmaninoff and Max Reger to write symphonic works entitled The Isle of the Dead. But was that due to the 440 and 432 debate? Because we're talking in an age really before the wax cylinder and the gramophone and the radio broadcast. But consider also, music is no different from anything else. If you look at the pattern, what has been started as creativity and being able to spread the message via the medium of the record or the radio broadcast, you have such things as record companies, and music is published. And if you look today, you'll find there are music groups. And if you trace that back, you will see it's no different from the world of books when it comes to publishing, that it comes back to very few actually own it. So again, this is why there are no great composers living today. You will not find a Beethoven or a Mozart and such like And you'll see this same reflection in architecture. If you look at the buildings which are referred to as Tartarian, the buildings that our ancestors built, that's just bullshit, this whole Tataria thing. I don't want to go off on a tangent about that in this video. But take your average town hall built around 1880, 1900, the aesthetically pleasing aspect to it. It is the counterpart of music. And if you listen to what is considered modern, contemporary classical music, you will find very much the same as is reflected in modern architecture, cube-like structures that do not have this aesthetically pleasing visual enjoyment about them. And I can think readily of this minimalist music of Steve Reich and Philip Glass, highly repetitive and totally lacking in that art spirit that you will find in Mozart and Beethoven. So hopefully that has addressed this 432-440 debate and given you a totally new perspective on which to take that same blueprint. So when you are seeing these things coming up on YouTube, like the 432 debate versus the 440, the Titanic versus the Olympic, and many, many more, to actually start looking for the simple message. Check the source. Where is it coming from? What is the intention of that video? Whether the video creator is in on it or not is irrelevant. How does it affect you? Is it bringing an imbalance to your internal world? That is the key question to always ask yourself. It's always ask yourself, what is the effect of this? What am I meant to feel from this? Or what is it trying to draw out of me? Always check the sources. And here's a perfect example, because you're asking yourself those questions internally. This is why it is said that the answers are already within, which they are. Now, the next video, I'm going to talk about what is probably the greatest secret society that exists today. So I'm going to leave you with that cliffhanger, because I think you're going to be somewhat surprised in what I talk about with this. So until then, as always, unconditional love to you all.